Hello and welcome to the next section of the course. We have already gone through all the important things of fully supported JavaScript version, from basic to advanced level. Also, we have built a huge project using the mentioned knowledge. Now it's time to move on and introduce new version of JavaScript language, which is ECMAScript 2015 or ES6. It's the hugest update of JavaScript, and it includes lots of new and great features. Throughout this section, I'm going to show you all the important new features comparing to ES5 version. In this part, we will cover the following topics: let and const variable declarations, template strings, arrow functions, default parameters, spread operator, rest parameter, destructuring, map, set, classes, and so on. Okay, let's get started. Before we actually start to describe the main concepts of ES6 version, I would like to introduce you some of the very popular and helpful built-in JavaScript array methods, which allow us to get the wanted results using writing less code. Generally, one of the main purposes of updating JavaScript from ES5 to ES6 was to minimize the amount of code that you write. That's why I'm going to describe array helper methods. By the way, the main goal to use mentioned methods is to replace for loop whenever it's possible. One of these methods you are already familiar with because we have used it several times previously. I'm talking about array for each method. If you don't remember it well, then do not worry, it happens usually, and because of that we will recall how it actually works. Besides the for each method, I'm going to describe map, filter, find, every, sum, and reduce. Each of these helpers will be discussed and compared to for loop in order to see clearly the difference, advantages and disadvantages between them. Alright, let's go to our code editor. As we said, I'm going to remind you how for each method works. For that, I'm going to create an array, names. Let's insert here some names, Alex, then Mary, Nick, and Jane. At first, in order to iterate through the items and get the names separately, let's use for loop. Write for, then variable I equals 0, then the condition I is less than the length of names, and then I++. Let's run in console. The name is, and plus here names I. Reload, and of course we have names as we expected. Okay, we can get the same result using for each. At first, let's make here a little border for better readability. And now let's use for each method. Write names dot for each. As you remember, we need to pass here function, which will be actually an iterator function, and for each array item, this function will be executed. As a parameter, we need to pass here current item. There is a special convention for array helpers in JavaScript. I mean that, for example, when we use array name in plural form, then the current item, which is passed as a parameter, is used in singular form. So write name here, and then get result in console. Write the name is, and plus the current item name. Reload, and you see that we have the exact same result in console. Alright, before we actually compare for loop and for each to each other, I'm going to show you how this method works behind the scenes. So here we have our array with its containing name items, and also the function which is passed in for each method and has the parameter name as a current item. As it's in case of for loop, for each helper has the iteration feature as well, so it takes into account the number of items in array and executes this function for each of this item. If you think about it, you will find that the name of this helper method, for each, defines itself the feature it has. Okay, so code is run, function is executed for the first item, Alex, and we get in console the name is Alex. Then it runs for second item, Mary, and we have the name is Mary, And then the same happens for Nick and for Jane as well. Then, because of that, we do not have any more items in array. For each terminates execution of this function. Make sense? Alright. So you see, we get the same results in both cases, but when we use for each method, it's kind of short way. We type less, and if you type less, it means that there is a lower chance to get errors and bugs. The logic is much more simple than it's in case of for loop, because you do not need to define all of those conditions. This is an advantage because when you look at some codes, it's easier to understand what's going on. So it's better to use for each instead of for loop in some cases, but an advantage for loop is that it works faster than the other array helpers. Alright, again I recommend to test this method and also other methods that will be discussed on your own, because those helpers are some kind of similar methods and it's easy to be confused if you do not practice a lot. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about another array helper method, which is map. As it was in case of for each method, I'm going to compare map helper to for loop. Suppose that we have an array which consists of some numbers, so create variable numbers and insert here numbers from, for example, 1 to 5. Then suppose that we want to multiply each of these numbers to 10. Keep each iteration result in a new array without changing the original one. So let's create an empty array and call it new array. And then let's use for loop to iterate through the numbers. Write variable I equals to 0. Then I is less than the length of numbers array. And then I++. So in order to add results in new array, I'm going to use known array method called push, which adds new item into array as a last one. So write new array dot push, and inside the parentheses write numbers I multiplied to 10. As we said, we want to create new array and keep the original one at the same time. So let's log both of them in console. Write console.log numbers and then console.log new array. Reload, and here we go. We have original array and the new array with new items. Alright, it's one of the ways to reach this result, but we can do the same but in much simpler and easier way using map helper. Let's again make here some border. I'm going to create new variable and store the result into this variable. So let's call it map array, which equals to numbers, and use here map helper. Syntax is very similar to for each method. We need to pass here an anonymous function, and then let's pass as a parameter number in singular form as it was previously. Alright, it's very important to remember that always when we deal with array helpers, we need to use return statement. So write return number multiplied to 10. Let's see in console what we have. Log at first the original numbers array, and then newly created variable map array. Reload, and here we go. We have the exact same result as it was in case of for loop. But in this case, you notice very clearly that the amount of code is much less than in previous case. We got same result in much more simple way, and the most important thing to note is that you realize at a glance that logic is much more simple to understand. Again, you must keep in mind always to use return statement, because if we miss it, then the function will give us the values as undefined. Alright, let's take a look on how map helper actually works behind the scenes. Here we have our original array of numbers, then another array which is created using map helper and the function itself. So at first, function is executed for first item 1. It's multiplied to 10 and then result is added to an empty array. Then function is executed for second item, which is 2. It's multiplied to 10 and the result is added to new array as well. And in the same way, function is executed for third item, then for fourth item, and for last item, which is 5, and all the results are added to a new array. Again, remember that when we use map_array_helper, the original array is maintained as immutable, which means that it's not changed. Make sense? Alright. Let's write one more example. Suppose that we have an array of persons which consists of several objects with properties first name and last name, so create variable persons. Then insert init object with properties first name John and last name Smith. Let's duplicate it twice and then change the values of properties. Write Bob, then Brown, and the third one Nick and Doe. Now suppose that we want to group first names in new array. For that, the perfect way is to use map_array_helper. So let's create variable getFirstNames, which equals to persons.map. Pass here again a function with parameter person. As we said, we're going to group first names of those objects, so we need to return person.firstname. So everything is ready. Let's make again here a little line. And then log both variables in console. Write console.log persons and then console.log get first names. Reload, and here we have our original persons array and then new array which consists of first names of the objects. You can try the same with for loop and you will be ensured that map is much more convenient and fast way to set up the same logic and get the same result. Alright, let's go ahead. The next helpers that I want to introduce you are filter and find. I decided to describe both of them in one video because they work in similar and simple way, so I don't want to consider them separately. Alright, let's write some examples. I'm going to start with filter helper. For that I want to create an array of persons which will consist of several objects, and suppose that we want to filter these objects depending on some condition. So let's write variable persons, then insert here an object with property name, Mary, and then write another property gender, female. Let's duplicate it 3 more times and change the names and genders properly. Write John and gender male, then Jane, then Bob and gender male. Okay, as we said, we want to filter those objects, and suppose that we want to choose only male objects and add them into new array. For that, at first we need to create new array. Let's call it males. Then we need to use for loop in order to iterate through the items, choose the proper one, and using push method add it to new array. Create for loop, write variable I equals to 0, then the condition I is less than the length of persons, then I++. Here we're going to use if statement, and as a condition we need to check if gender of the person is equal to male. Write if persons I.gender triple equals to male. So if this condition is true, then we need to write males.push and as a parameter persons I. So let's log them in console, write console.log persons, and then console.log males. Reload, and here we have at first original persons array, and then the filtered one, which consists of male persons. Alright, this is the way which uses for loop, and now I'm going to do the same using filter helper, but before that let's again separate the codes. I'm going to create variable females, and in this variable I'm going to store, in this case, female persons. So create variable females, which equals to persons. Use here filter helper. The syntax again is similar as it was in case of previous helpers. We need to pass here anonymous function with the parameter person, which again will be in singular form. So as we said, we want to choose female persons, therefore we need to write return statement in which the gender property should be equal to female. Write return person dot gender triple equals to female. Let's again log both variables in console, write console.log persons, and then console.log females. Reload, and you see that at first we have again original persons array, and then filtered array which consists of female persons. So filter method did absolutely the same job as for loop, but again you see at a glance that we needed for that less time because of less amount of code, and again logic is very simple and easy to understand in case of filter helper. Alright, let's take a look in depth how filter helper actually works behind the scenes. So here we have our persons array with its containing objects. Then we have the variable females in which female persons should be added. And also here we have filter helper. On first iteration, function is executed for the first object with name property Mary. Because of that, Mary has the gender female. The condition inside function is true. Therefore it returns true value and the object is added to female array. The function is executed for the second object, which has name property John and the gender male. Condition is false, so function returns false value and therefore object is not added to array. Then in the same way, function is executed for the third object Jane. Condition is true and object is added to array. As for the fourth object, you see that gender is male. Function returns false value because condition is false. Therefore, object is not added to the array. Alright, that's the way how filter helper actually works. Let's go to brackets and move on to the next helper, which is find. As we said, find works in the similar way as filter helper does, but there is only one difference. Filter helper iterates through all the items in array and adds in new array the item for which the condition is true. But in case of find helper, when it finds that condition is true, it adds this current item in new array and immediately terminates iteration. Make sense? Okay, so if we change here filter into find and then reload, we will get only the first object because the condition for the first item is true and find helper stops iteration. We can reach the same result if we use for loop. For that, we just need to pass here known break statement, which actually stops looping through the items. So write break, then reload, and you see that we have the same result. Okay, let's consider briefly how find helper works. Again, we have here our persons array, then the females variable, and find helper. So on the first iteration, function is executed for the first item, which is again object with name property Mary and gender female. The condition inside function is true. It returns true value. Object is added to females array, and after that, find helper terminates working. So this is the way how find helper actually works behind the scenes. Alright, that's it. See you in the next lecture. Let's move on to the next array helpers. In this lecture, I want to introduce you every and some array helpers. I decided to demonstrate those helpers in one video because they work in kinda similar way as it was in case of filter and find helpers. As usually, before we consider how those helpers actually work, I'm going to use for loop in order to compare it to them and also demonstrate how convenient and faster approaches they are. For that, I'm going to create an array of persons in which I will insert some objects with properties name and age. So right here John and the age 28. Let's duplicate it 3 times and also change the values. Write Mary, then the age 20, then write Nick and 15, and then finally write Jane and the age 40. Okay, so here we have persons with names and ages, and we wonder if all of those persons or only some of them can vote in elections. And we're going to figure out in it according to their ages. For that, first of all, we will use for loop, but before that I'm going to create variables. Let's call it every person can vote. As a default, let's assign to this variable true value. Then create another one and call it only some persons can vote. And in this case, as a default, let's assign to this variable false value. Alright, now let's use for loop. Write variable I equals to 0. Then compare I to the length of persons. And then I++. So if one of those persons' age is less than 18, then we want to change value of every person can vote variable from true into false. And in the same way, we want to change the value of only some persons can vote variable from false into true. For that, in for loop, we need to create if statements, which should have the following condition. If persons I dot age is less than 18. So if this condition is true, if one of the person's age is less than 18, then we need every person can vote equal to false. And at the same time, we need to assign to some persons can vote variable the value true. Alright, let's log in console. Write here every person can vote, then the dash, and place here every person can vote variable. And then again run in console. Only some persons can vote plus the variable only some persons can vote. Alright, let's reload, and you see that every person can vote is false and only some persons can vote is true. Actually, it's obvious because in persons we have Nick, which is 15 years old. If we change it and write, for example, 25, then we will get the opposite values. Every person can vote is true and only some persons can vote is false. Okay, so using for loop we have figured out if every person from array can vote or only some of them can vote. It's nice, it works, but as you notice, for that we have used a bit more logic and also much coding. Instead of this stuff, we are able to use array helper methods, every and some. At first, let's use every helper, which gives us Boolean value true or false. It checks condition for all the items, and if the condition is true for all of them, it returns true. But if the condition is false, at least for one item, then it returns false. So create variable and call it every. Then assign to it persons and use here every array helper with anonymous function, and then insert here as a parameter person. Then, as you remember, we need return statement. Because of that, we wonder if person can vote or not. We need the following condition: person.age is greater than or equal to 18. Let's log in console the variable every. Then reload the page, and we have true, because all persons' ages are greater than 18. If we change one of them and write, for example, for Mary, age 10, then we will get false. Alright, let's consider in depth how every helper works. So here we have persons array with objects, and also every helper with its iterator function. On the first iteration, function is executed for first item, John. His age is 28, therefore condition is true, and every helper returns true value after first iteration. On the second iteration, function is executed for second object, Mary. The condition is still true because her age is 20. Every helper again returns true. After that, function is executed for third object, Nick. His age is 15, so condition is false and we get false value. As soon as we get false value, every helper terminates iteration and we get final value as false. You can imagine that every helper uses logical AND operator, and you know that in case of AND operator, if all conditions are true, we get true finally. But if at least one of the conditions is false, then we get false value. The exact same happens in case of every helper. Also remember that as soon as every helper finds false value, it immediately terminates iteration, because continuing execution of function won't make any sense. It's a nice feature because it helps JavaScript engine to execute code faster. Alright, let's go back to brackets, and as usual, let's prove what I have just said. For that, at first I'm going to create variable x and assign to it value as 0. This variable actually will be counter. I want to show you what happens on each iteration. Let's run in console. Right here ++x. I wrote ++ increment operator before the variable x in order to get directly 1 instead of 0. If I wrote it after x, then we would get 0 at first. Then write +dash and then plus the condition person.age is greater than or equal to 18. And also for Mary, change back age into 20. Alright, reload the page. So you see on every iteration, condition is true. That's why we have 4 iterations. And also that's the reason why we have true value as a result. If we change the age of Mary into 10, then we will get on first iteration true value, and on second one false. Also you see that third and fourth iterations are not executed anymore, and because of the false value on second iteration, finally we have false. Alright, I think that regarding every helper, everything is clear for you. Let's go ahead and talk about some helper. So here we have array of persons, but in this case with different ages. Also here we have some helper. On the first iteration, function is executed for first object John. His age is 10, therefore condition is false, and some helper returns false value. Unlike every helper, it continues and moves on second iteration. Function is executed for second object Mary. Condition is still false, and again, some helper returns false value. Then function is executed for third object Nick. In this case, condition is true because his age is greater than 18, and some helper returns true value. As soon as it finds true value, it terminates iterations and gives us as a result value true. Unlike every helper, some uses logical OR operator. So again, some helper checks condition, and as soon as it finds true value, stops iterations. But if condition is false for all items, then this is the only case when some helper returns false value. Make sense? Alright, let's go back to brackets and change every into sum. Also change the condition and write person.age is less than or equal to 18. Reload. And we got on first iteration false value, and on second iteration we have true. So on second iteration some helper found true value, and as a result it returned true. If we change the age of Mary and write 20, then we will get false in all 4 iterations and for final result as well. Alright, it was all about every and some helpers. See you in the next video. It's time to introduce last array helper. In this section I'm going to describe reduce helper, which actually is different and a bit complicated than previous array helpers. In order to explain how reduce helper actually works, I'm going to start with a classical example which you may come across if you try to find information about reduce. At first, as usually, I'm going to compare reduce helper to for loop. Suppose that we have array with some numbers, for example 100, 200 and 300. Then we want to sum those numbers and return the total sum as a single value. For that I'm going to create variable sum, which actually will be initial value, and let's set it as 0. After that create for loop, write variable I equals to 0, then I is less than numbers.length and the increment. Inside curly braces write variable sum. Because of that we want to add numbers and then save value after each iteration. We want to use plus equals operator. And then numbers I. Okay, let's run in console the variable sum. Reload the page and you see that we have 600, the total sum of items in array. Alright, it works fine, but now I'm going to achieve the same using reduce helper. Let's make here a little border. And then create new variable, call it total. Assign to it numbers. And use here reduce helper. Again, we have to pass here anonymous function. This function receives at least 2 parameters. Generally in JavaScript, first parameter is called as previous, or sometimes as an accumulator. You can use any of them. So this parameter actually accumulates values after each iteration. As for the second parameter, it's again current item, as it was in case of previous helpers. So write number. Reduce helper may have more parameters like index of array and the array itself, but using those parameters are optional. Now let's return previous plus number. Actually, reduce helper itself receives 2 parameters. First one is callback function, which we have already passed here, and second one is the value of the previous parameter. In other words, it's an initial value, and in this case we need to set it as 0. Let's log total variable in console. Reload. And we have same result, which is 600. Alright, as usually, let's see how reduce helper works. So here we have array with numbers, and as you saw we have set previous parameter or an initial value as 0. On the first iteration, function is executed for the first item, 100. The value of previous parameter is 0, which is added to 100. After the first iteration, the value of previous parameter becomes 100. Then starts second iteration. The function is executed for the second item, 200, which will be added to previous value 100. So after second iteration, we will get 300. Then starts third iteration. The function is executed for the third item of array. It's added to previous value, which is 300, and finally, as a result, we get 600 as a single value. Make sense? Alright, this is the way how reduce helper works. Let's go back to brackets and write some more real-world examples. Suppose that person has fixed monthly salary and also besides that he has weekly bonuses. Assume that we want to get the total monthly income of that person. So create an array and call it weekly earnings. Let's insert in that array some numbers. Then create another variable and call it income. We're going to use again reduce helper, so let's assign to that variable weekly earnings dot reduce, then anonymous function. This function will receive two parameters. For previous value, let's insert here previous, and as a current item, write weekly earning. In order to get the sum of those earnings, we have to return previous plus weekly earning. And as we said, person has fixed monthly salary, which will be added to weekly earnings. We're going to set it as initial value, so write as the second parameter for reduce helper, for example, 5,000. Let's log in console variable income, reload, and we have here the total monthly income of person, which consists of weekly earnings and also fixed salary. Alright, I believe you guess how useful and convenient reduce helper should be, but you also may think that we can use reduce helper only with numbers. Actually, it's not right, and in order to prove that, I'm going to write another example. Suppose that we have arrays for first names and for last names, so create variable first names and insert here some names, John, then Jane and Mary. Also create another variable for last names and place here the items Smith, Brown and Doe. And suppose that we want to create one new array which will include full names of the persons like John Smith, Jane Brown and Mary Doe. So create new variable and name it as full names. Then assign to it first names and use here reduce helper. Place anonymous function with two parameters, previous, and then as current item write first name. So as we said, full names should be a new array, therefore reduce helper will have as a second parameter and actually as an initial previous value an empty array. And in order to accumulate first names and last names in that array, we're going to use push method. So write previous dot push, then inside parentheses write first name plus the space, and now we need to get proper last names. For that we have to use second array last names, but actually it's array and it doesn't represent current item like first name. So in order to get last names, we need to iterate through this array and get the relevant items. For that we're going to use little trick. As we said previously, reduce helper can receive more than two parameters. One of them is index, which generally should represent the index number of first names array. But because of that, both arrays have the same length, 3. I'm going to use index parameter for last names array items. But again, remember that generally index parameter represents index of array for which reduce helper is used. In this case, the array of first names. Alright, so let's go ahead and write last names and in square brackets index. And the last thing to do is to return previous value. which actually will give us final full names array. Okay, let's run in console the variable full names. Reload the page. And you see that we have new array which consists of full names, John Smith, Jane Brown, and Mary Doe. The result that we wanted to get. Alright, I've written this example just for demonstration that reduce helper can be used not only with numbers, but with other data as well. Okay, this was all about reduce helper. It's a little bit complicated than previous helpers, but I hope you could understand it well. Alright, let's move on. So we have finished considering array helpers, and now it's time to actually start describing updated and new features of JavaScript, which are represented in ES6 version. Generally, I would like to note that there is almost nothing in ECMAScript 2015 or ES6 version that could not be done using ES5. So because of that, throughout this section, in most cases we will compare ES5 and ES6 code to each other. The first thing that we're going to discuss is the most popular change in ES6, which is variable declaration. You already know how to declare variable. We have done it dozens of times. For that we need to use keyword var with name and value. Let's log them in console. So here we have John and 28. In ES5 we are able to change dynamically values of the variables. For example, if we assign to name and age variables the other values like Nick and 29 to age, then they will be dynamically changed. This stuff is different in ES6, and let's see how it actually works. In new version of JavaScript, there are two types of variable declarations, let and const. When we want to update the content of variable dynamically, we should use keyword let. But if we want to never change the content of the variable, then we have to use const, which actually stands for constant. In this case, I'm going to declare name variable with const, because you agree that in most cases the name of the person never changes. As for the age, it's definitely changed, therefore I'm going to declare it with let. Actually, this is the main and the only difference between let and const declarations. Alright, let's reload the page, and you see that we have an error, and the problem is in assignment to constant variable. So as we said, when you assign the value to constant variable, then you can never change it. It doesn't matter if you write here Nick or its initial value John. Anyway, we will get an error. So you cannot use assignment operator, equal sign, with the same constant variable twice. Okay, as for the constant variable, I would like to note that recently there was a special convention in JavaScript. If developers wanted to never change the values of variables, for that they were using capital letters with variable names, like this. Alright, let's delete this line of code, reload, and we have John and 29. So in case of let variable, we do not have any problem with updating the value of the variable. At a glance, it seems that let declaration works exactly as var declaration does. Actually, I can tell you that they work in similar way, but there are some differences between those declarations. Alright, let's remove this code. So as we know, in ES5 we can create a variable, for example person, and assign to it value John Smith. And then, using the same variable name, we can overwrite new value to old one. So if we check in console person variable, of course we will get Nick Doe. Let's see what happens in ES6. Change var keywords into let. Then reload. And you see that we have an error, which tells us that person has already been declared. So it means that in ES6 you are not able to overwrite value of the same variables. And actually it's really helpful and great feature, because in practice when you deal with large code, it will allow us to avoid naming conflicts with variables. Alright, let's talk about another difference between let and var. Let's delete this line of code and change let into var and run in console, write it before its declaration. So you see that we have undefined. Because of hoisting, and I'm sure that you remember what hoisting is, if we change var into let and then reload, we have an error saying that person is not defined. So JavaScript engine, instead of undefined, directly gave us an error, and in my opinion it's better. Actually, JavaScript engine knows that there exists this variable, but it doesn't allow us to reach it. This is known as temporal dead zone. It's not actually official term, but most developers use it. We will get absolutely the same result if we use constant instead of let. Alright, let's delete these codes. I want to show you one more difference between var, let, and const. Many developers actually do not mention it, but I want to refer to it. As we remember, when we create variable on global level, it actually is stored as a property of global window object. So if we write var a equals to 10 and then check the window object, we will find variable a as its property. Also, if we write window.a, then we will get 10. Let's see what happens in case of let and constant. Change var into let, then reload and check again window object. You see that we cannot find here a. Also, if we write window.a, then we will get undefined. The exact same happens if we use constant instead of let. A won't be stored as a property of global window object, and also window.a will give us undefined. So in ES6 version, let and const variables declared on global level are not stored as properties of global window object, but regardless of that, they act as global variables if they are declared on global level, like it's in case of var. Alright, let's go ahead and talk about the main difference between var, let, and const. As we know, in ES5, variables are function scoped. Let's recall what it means. Create function a, and inside curly braces, create variable b with the value hello, and then outside of function, run in console the variable b. If we reload, we will get an error which tells us b is not defined. So in this case, variable b is in function scope and we cannot access on it from outside function. The same happens with let and also with constant. In both cases, we have b is not defined. So let and const variables are function scoped as well, but at the same time, they are block scoped variable declarations. And it's the main difference between var and let and constant. Let's see what this exactly means. Delete this function and create if statement. And as a condition, let's just insert here true. Then inside curly braces, create variable first name and assign to it the value John. Then run it in console from outside if statement. Reload, and of course it works. We have John here. If we change var into let, then reload, you see that we have an error saying that first name is not defined. The same will happen if we use constant instead of let. So as we said, let and constant variables are block scoped. In block I mean everything that is surrounded by curly braces. So if we create outside of if statement variable first name using let declaration, then we will have Nick in console. Regardless of that, those variables have the same names, first name, they are completely different variables. If we run inside block first name in console, then we will get John and Nick, so it means that those are different variables. Alright, the next thing that I want to show you is that in case of let declaration, we are able to declare it outside of block and then assign the value inside block. So if we just get rid of inside block the let keyword and also delete this console.log, then we will get the updated value of variable first name as John. But in case of constant, we cannot do that because we cannot reassign to constant variable new value. But in case of constant, there is one exception. When we deal with objects, let's change back constant into let and create new object with constant declaration, right, person, and insert here some properties, name as Jane and then the age as 18. Then in if statement, change the value of age property and make it 19, and then run in console person object. You see that the value of age property is changed from 18 into 19. So when we use constant declaration with objects, we can manipulate on the values of the properties of that object. Make sense? Alright. Now I'm going to demonstrate what happens when we deal with loops. So create simple for loop, right? Variable I equals to 0. Then as a condition, I'm going to write here I is less than 5. And then the increment I++. Inside curly braces, let's log in console the variable I. Let's reload. And we have numbers from 0 to 4. In case of var declaration, we are able to access variable a from outside of for loop. So if we write console.log I, then we will get 5. If you expected 4 or something else instead of 5, I would like to remind you that after last iteration, I is increased to 5, condition became false, so loop has stopped execution, and that's why the value of variable I has been maintained as 5. Alright, let's change var into let. Reload. And you see that at first we have numbers from 0 to 4. That's because of first console.log, which is placed inside block. But then we have an error, and the reason is that from outside of for loop, we cannot access on let, because it's block scoped, and for loop like if else statement and functions also creates block. Alright, when we use let declaration on each iteration, new variable is created, and in order to prove that, I'm going to change slightly this example. In JavaScript, we have built-in method called setTimeout, which actually works in almost similar way as setInterval method. The difference is that it executes function once after delay. SetTimeout method takes two parameters. First one is callback function, and the second one is amount of time, which actually defines delay before function is executed, and it's expressed in milliseconds. So write setTimeout, then insert anonymous function, then place this console.log inside curly braces. In order to see better how for loop works and how each iteration is done, as a second parameter, I'm going to place here I multiplied to 500 milliseconds. And also change let into var, delete this console.log, reload, and you see that we have number 5 times. That happens because when function is invoked, at this moment for loop is already finished, the value of variable I is 5, and Because of the delay, we get it 5 times. Let's change var into let and see what happens. You see that numbers are appeared from 0 to 4. It's kind of strange, right? So let me explain what has happened here. In case of let variable, we know that it's block scoped, so on each iteration, new variable is created. So on each function execution, there are used different variables, and what you see here, I mean numbers from 0 to 4, those are values of 5 different variables. Make sense? Alright, you may wonder what happens if we use constant instead of let. Some of you may think that because of that, after each iteration, new variable is created. Logically, we should get here same result. Let's see what happens. Change let into constant. And you see that we have an error and also 0. So this error is caused because we cannot modify the value of constant. Initially its value is 0. On first iteration it gives us 0. That's why we see in console 0. But at the end of the first iteration, when the JavaScript engine sees I++, you know that I++ is the same as I equals to I plus 1. So it means that assignment operator comes into play. And because of that, we are not able to reassign new value to constant variable. That's the reason why we have an error here. Make sense? Alright, before we finish this lecture, I'm going to show you one more thing. So as you remember, in ES5 we could create blocks for data privacy using immediately invoked function expressions. We have seen it clearly in our quiz application. In order to create ifs, we have to open parentheses, then write function, then inside curly braces, let's create variable a, which equals to 10, then invoke the function, and outside the function write console.log a. Of course, we have an error because we cannot get access on variable a from outside IFI. But in ES6, this stuff became much more simpler. We don't need to create ifs anymore for creating blocks. We have just to use curly braces. And let's create here let b, which equals to, for example, 30. If we run it in console from outside of block, then we will get an error, because we cannot access on variable b from outside of block. Obviously, the same happens with constant declaration. You see that again we have an error. But there is one thing to note: if we use here var keyword, then those curly braces won't work, because again var declaration is not block scoped. Alright. After all of this stuff, you may have a question when and where to use var, let, or constant. Some of the developers recommend to use let and const and ignore var declaration if you write ES6 code, but some of them recommend to use var declaration only in case of declaring the global variables. I suggest to use let and const and ignore var declaration when you write in ES6, but it's up to you. You can take into account both recommendations. Also, generally use constant declarations in most cases, but when you know that you would have to update dynamically values of variables, then always declare them using let. Alright, that's it. See you in the next video. One of the greatest features that was released in ES6, and actually one of my favorites, is template strings. It allows us to work with strings in kind of different way. As you already know, in ES5 we used single and double quotes, and also in order to concatenate values we had to use plus operator. Let's recall once again how to deal with strings. I'm going to create variables, and let's use here known const and let declarations. Create variable name, John, then age, which equals to 28, then create third variable profession with the value instructor. Then create function which actually will be a simple one because I just want to remind you how to work with strings and how to concatenate values. At first I'm going to use ES5 code, therefore let's call this function person ES5. Then run in console some text, write my name is, then plus name, plus again some text I am, then place the variable age, then plus years old and I am, and finally insert here variable profession. So here we use string values which are concatenated to variables name, age and profession. For that we have used several plus signs. Also each part of string value is surrounded by quotes, but it's the way how we can work with string values in ES5. Okay, let's call this function write person ES5. So we have in console my name is John, I am 28 years old and I am instructor. So we got the result, what we needed, but agree that we have achieved it kinda hard way, because as we said, we have used several plus signs, quotes, and so on. In order to avoid such inconvenient way of working, ES6 allows us to use template strings. Let's see what I'm talking about. Let's copy this function and paste here. Also change the name from ES5 to ES6. I'm going to delete this content which is placed in console.log, and now it's time to use new template strings which are expressed by backticks. In most cases this key is placed on the left side next to one key on keyboard. So the first that we want to write here is my name is. Then we need to place here name variable, but for that we do not need to use plus signs or ending single quotes anymore. Instead of that, we have to write $, then open curly braces and place name variable. Then simply we have to make space here and write the next coming text, which is I am. As you see, we have to place here another variable. So let's do it in the same way, use $, then curly braces, and then age, then again write text, years old, and I am, and finally place here the variable profession in the same way with $, and curly braces. So as you see, we didn't use here plus sign, also quotes. The entire string is surrounded by backticks, and the variables are placed in curly braces and they are written with $signs. Alright, let's invoke this function. Then reload, and you see that we got an exact same result, but again in more convenient and nice way. Okay, you see here that we have words I am, and suppose that we want to write it with apostrophe. For that in ES5 we had to use little hack. We just need to use backslash and then single quote, reload, and you see that it works. But in ES6 we can do it in much more simpler way. We don't need any slashes because string is surrounded by backticks, which are absolutely different characters from quotes. We just need to place here single quotes, reload, and we got the same result. Alright, if we want to make line break, in ES5 we could do that using backslash and n. So reload, and you see that line is broken in two parts. As for ES6, we can just break the line in code editor using pressing the enter key, which again is more convenient way to break the lines. Okay, so as you see, template strings are really great feature of ES6. It makes our lives much easier as programmer. Actually, I would like to note that if you don't need to concatenate string values with variables, then you can use a standard ES5 way. I mean, you can declare variables with single or double quotes, so it's not mandatory to use backticks with variable declarations. Alright, let's use some more examples. I'm going to create a function which will actually calculate years of experience of person. Suppose that the person has working experience in 2 companies, and we want to get the total sum of years of experience from both companies. So let's insert here 2 parameters, company 1 and company 2. Then inside curly braces write console.log. So in order to get the sum of years of experience, we need to add the years of experience from company 1 to company 2 and concatenate this value to string values. So write I have, then plus, and open parenthesis, insert here parameters company 1 and company 2, then plus years of experience in programming. Let's invoke this function and also use some arguments, right? For example, 4 and 7. Reload, and of course it works. We got the result. I have 11 years of experience in programming. Alright, let's transform it into ES6 version. Instead of quotes, place here backticks. Then delete those plus signs. Surround company 1 and company 2 with curly braces and also place here $sign. Let's reload, and you can see that we have again the same result. As you saw, at first the addition was performed in curly braces, and then we got string value. Okay, besides that, we are able to invoke the function inside curly braces. Let's use here the value from person ES6 function. For that, let's change this console.log into return statement in order to get the value. Then place here in experience function $sign and inside curly braces invoke function person ES6. Reload, and we have result. My name is John. I am 28 years old and I'm instructor. I have 11 years of experience in programming. Okay, fine. It's really cool, right? So again, template strings allow us to avoid using single quotes or double quotes and the relationship between them, which sometimes becomes really annoying. Also, we do not need to use plus signs anymore. Alright, before we finish this lecture, I'm going to introduce you several built-in string methods which were released in ES6. Those methods in some cases may be used as powerful and great tools. The first method that I want to show you is start with method. So create a variable and call it greet, then assign to it string value, hello my dear student. Let's say we want to check if this string value starts with specified character or characters. So for that we can use starts with method, which actually returns boolean value true or false. So write console.log greet.starts_with. This method takes as an argument character or characters which we want to check. As you see, our string value starts with hello, so let's use this word here, write hello. Reload, and we got true. If we write hello without capital letter, then we will get false because this method takes into account case sensitivity. Alright, in order to check if string value ends with specified character, we can use ends with method. Let's duplicate it, change the name of the method, write ends with, then reload, and we have false because the string doesn't end with hello. Let's change it into, for example, ENT. Then you see that we've got true. Alright. The next method that I want to show you is includes, which actually checks if the string value includes the specified string characters. Let's duplicate it again and change the method, write includes, and as an argument, let's place here dir. Reload the page, and you see that we have true because the word dir is a part of our string value. Okay, and the last method that I'm going to introduce you is repeat. As the name of this method tells us, it's obvious that it repeats the string values. So for example, if we pass here as an argument 3, then we will get our string value 3 times. Alright, those methods are very helpful in real-world coding, so you know already how they work, and I'm sure that you will use them in your future projects. Okay, it was all about template strings in ES6. Let's go ahead. In this lecture, we're going to talk about one of the most popular new features of ES6. I'm going to introduce you what arrow functions are. As we said, the main goal of release of ECMAScript 2015 version was to minimize the amount of code, and one of the perfect examples to achieve that in ES6 is to use arrow functions. First of all, I would like to mention that generally arrow functions do not completely replace standard functions which we're using as usually. And in order to avoid unexpected results and errors, you need to definitely understand well in which situations and in which cases it's better to use arrow functions. Again, in this lecture, I'm going to compare arrow functions to standard function declarations. So I'm going to create a simple function expression. Let's create constant variable multiply, which equals to anonymous function with 2 parameters, x and y. Inside that function, let's create let variable z, which will store the multiplication of x and y parameters, and then return the value of z. Okay, let's invoke this function with some arguments. Write console.log multiply and place here as an arguments 5 and 6. Reload, and we have, of course, 30. As you see, this function expression does not contain lots of characters, and it's very easy to read, but thanks to arrow functions in ES6, we can write this function in more concise way. For that, we have to get rid of keyword function. Then, after parameters, we have to place arrow, which actually consists of equal and greater than signs. You may be surprised how this function expression works without the keyword function, but if we reload the page, then we will get the same result. You may think that why do we need to replace function keyword with that arrow? I mean that at a glance there is not a huge difference between the amount of code in this case and in previous one, but actually using arrow functions we can transform this function into more concise form. When we have 2 or more statements inside curly braces, then in ES6 version we have to maintain those curly braces, but if we return here directly x multiplied to y without z variable, then we can remove these curly braces and then remove even return keyword. Now we can say that this is really short and concise transformation of function expressions. This is a really great feature, but on the other hand, to read the code is a little bit hard, especially when you first introduce this feature, but I think that it's an issue of practicing. So in this case, we have 2 parameters here, and that's why we surround them with parentheses. But in case of 1 parameter, let's suppose we have only x, which then is multiplied to 10. Then we don't need to use that parenthesis anymore. Reload the page, and you see that it works. So again, when we use only 1 parameter, we can write it without parentheses. Alright, let's see what happens if we don't have parameters. Let's delete x and then write 5 multiplied to 10. And also remove this argument. Reload. And you see that we have syntax error. JavaScript engine cannot recognize what this arrow is here. So when we use function expressions and we don't have parameters, Then we have to place here empty parentheses. So you see that it works now. Okay. Let's say we want to return as a value an object, but without using return keyword. If we simply create an object with property first name John, then we will get in console undefined. So in order to avoid this unexpected value, we have just to surround this object with parentheses, and then it will work. Alright, one of the key points regarding arrow functions is that we can use them only with anonymous functions. If we want to declare function statements, then we have to do it in usual way. Alright, in this lecture we have discussed just the basic syntactic changes about functions in ES6. Let's move on to the next lecture, in which I'm going to show you some more important features regarding arrow functions. Let's go ahead. Before we actually represent different behavior of arrow functions than it's in case of standard functions, I want to give you a little example and show how convenient it is to use arrow functions with array helpers. I'm not going to write the code in ES5, let's use directly ES6 here. So create numbers array, and place here some numbers. Then assume that we want to create new array. For that I will use one of the array helper methods, which is map. So create variable and call it double. Assign to it numbers.map. So here we don't need to use parentheses because we're going to use only one parameter, which will be the current item. So write number, then use arrow function, and then number multiplied to 2. Let's run in console the variable double, then reload, and we have new array, which consists of doubled numbers. Alright, just for your information, I would like to recommend that when you are going to be using array helpers, would be more convenient to use arrow functions with them, because those helpers actually have one statement. Therefore, it will allow you to write code in more concise form. Okay, actually we have seen mostly the syntactic changes in arrow functions so far, which are made in ES6 version, but there is also one big difference between standard and arrow functions, which you should definitely take into account. I'm going to talk about lexical this. In order to understand what it means, I don't want to talk a lot about theory. Let's just write an example and see what it means. At first, let's write ES5 code, create object, and call it person ES5. Then insert here some properties, first name as Nick, and last name as Doe. Then create method inside object and call it say full name, and assign to it anonymous function. Just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to return function in which we will get full name of the person. So write here console.log, and we're going to use here this, which, as you remember, is special variable, and it points to an object, and actually it depends on where it exists lexically. So write this dot first name plus space here, then plus this dot last name. Let's invoke say full name method, write person ES5 dot say full name. In order to invoke return function, we just need to place here another parenthesis. Before I reload, I want you to think about what will be the result. I'm sure you guessed that result is undefined values. It's because this function is not bound to any specific object, and in that case this variable points to global window object. In order to prove that, let's run it in console, write console.log this. You see that we got window object. As you remember, we used a little trick here. We have to create variable outside of this function, and generally this variable is called as self or sometimes that. Let's call it that. And we have to assign to this variable this, which in this case points to person ES5 object. Then instead of this variable, insert here that. If we reload, we will get nickdoe, and also you see that that variable points to person object. Alright, there is another way to do that which allows us to avoid creating new variable. We can use here bind method and indicate in it this variable as an argument, which actually points to person object. Also, let's change back that into this and delete that variable. Reload, and we have the same output. Obviously, instead of this, we can insert here person object, person ES5, and the result will be the same. Alright, so we need all of this stuff in ES5, but in ES6 everything is much more simpler. We don't need to create variables, also we don't need to use bind method. We can just use arrow function, and I think that it's one of the best use case of arrow functions. Okay, let's copy this function and transform it as ES6 version. Right here, const person ES6. Then change function into arrow function. I'm going to transform also this string value into template string. Then delete bind method, and also write here below person ES6. Let's reload, and we have the same needed result. It happens because in case of arrow functions, this variable points to functions surrounding scope. So in this case, this variable in sayFullName method points to person object, and because of that, sayFullName function scope is surrounding scope of our returned function. Therefore, this variable in returned function points to person object. Make sense? Okay, so this is very helpful and important feature of arrow functions because it allows us to avoid using the tricks which we had to use in case of ES5 code. This stuff may be a bit confusing for you, so I'm going to use another example. As you see, we have here heading element, and I'm going to attach event listener to this element. So write document and use here query selector method. Place here h1 heading element. Then attach event listener with click event. And also write here anonymous function. Okay, let's check what this variable points here. Write console.log this. Reload. Then click on heading, and you see that it points to clicked element itself. Let's create function expression inside anonymous function. Write variable a equals to function, and let's say we want to change the color of heading element into red on click. So write this dot style dot color equals to red, and then invoke this function. Reload, then click, and we have an error. That's because in this case, as you already guessed, this variable inside function a points to global window object. If we transform function a into arrow function, then this variable will act like outer functions this. So reload, click, and the heading became red. Alright, I'm sure that now it makes sense to you. Before we finish, I'm going to show you one thing. When we deal with objects with ES6 and also objects contain methods, for example in this case person ES6, here we have method sayFullName, we're able to get rid of function keyword and place parentheses with method's name. then it will work in the same way, but as a regular function and not as arrow function. Otherwise, we wouldn't get your Nikto in console. Okay, so you have learned how arrow functions work in ES6, and I recommend you to take into account the issue regarding this variable in order to avoid weird bugs and errors. Alright, let's move on. ES6 allows us to work with arrays in kinda different way. There are new features released in ECMAScript 2015 that actually makes our job much comfortable and easier. So in this lecture we're going to be talking about changes that we have in ES6 regarding arrays. Before we actually start and write some examples, let's take a look on index.html file. I have created UL element with some list items. Simply I have passed here ABCD. We have some styles here, and also I've created class which I will use a bit later. So you see on the page 4 nicely designed list items, and the first thing that I'm going to do is to select those list elements. So create variable constant lis and assign to it document dot and use here getElements by tagname method, and insert here tagname li. Then run in console variable lis. So here we got HTML collection. I'm sure you remember what does it mean. HTML collection is an array-like object. It looks like as array. Items in that collection have index numbers. Also it has length property, but again it's not array, it's an HTML collection. In document object model section we have talked about it, but I'm going to remind you that we cannot use array built-in methods with HTML collections. For that we have to transform them into arrays, and in order to do that we were using array.from method. Actually it's ES6 feature. We used it in advance because in ES5 we can transform HTML collections into arrays in kind of difficult way, which then would cause confusion and misunderstanding, because in that moment you were not familiar with advanced JavaScript concepts. But at this point we can feel free and use this approach. So in order to convert HTML collection into array, we have to use the following trick. Create new variable constant lis array. Then we have to assign to this variable array.prototype. Array.prototype is an object which contains all built-in properties and methods of array. After that we have to access on array slice method. It's first time when we use this method, but there is nothing difficult. It works in a very simple way. Generally slice method copies a piece of array. It takes two parameters which indicate beginning and the end of array. But without arguments, slice method just copies the entire array. So we have access on slice method, and now we need to use call method, in which we have to indicate on which object has slice method to work. You can imagine that slice is a regular function, and we change on which object to point its special this variable. In simple words, slice method assumes that this HTML collection object is an array because it's actually index based and also it has length property. So without any problem, slice method returns array. Let's insert inside call method lis and then check in console what we have. Right, console.log lis array. Reload, and you see that we have here array. I know that all of this stuff is a little bit hard to understand, and that's why in ES6 version we have a great solution which you are already familiar with, and it's array.from. It allows us to get rid of this little bit difficult stuff and instead of it write just from. Reload, and you see that we have again array here. Alright, let's remove console.log, and also we don't need this variable. In order to make our example more interesting, I'm going to use here for each array helper. Actually we can do it because lis variable is already converted into array. I'm going to make those boxes dynamically changeable on click event. So that's why I have created class change in HTML file. Let's attach event listener to each list element. So as current item, insert here li, then use arrow function, and then set event listener with click event, write li dot add event listener, then click event, again write here function. So on click, we're going to assign to list elements class name change, and for that write li dot class list. In order to change dynamically style of list elements, I'm going to use here toggle method, which actually assigns and then removes class from element, and as an argument write here class name change. Reload and then click on items. You see that we have here little nice effect. Alright, let's go ahead and talk about next feature of ES6, which is for of statement. It actually iterates through array items, and besides that it also works with array-like objects like HTML collections, node list, and so on. Using for of statement we can achieve the same result that you have seen just minutes ago. Let's comment this code out and write for, then inside parentheses declare variable which actually should be current item from li's collection, and then we need keyword of and also the collection itself. So for of will iterate through li's items and will execute the code inside code block for each item. Let's copy these two lines and paste here, reload, click on list elements, and you see that we have same nice effects. Okay, as you notice, for of statement is expressed in very simple way. We don't have to use here some complicated conditions. We just have to use those two keywords for and of. Alright, in this lecture we have introduced two changes in ES6 regarding arrays, and also you have learned how for of statement works. See you in the next video. Now it's time to consider another very helpful and convenient feature which was released in ES6. I'm going to talk about default parameters. Let's go to brackets and create function. Let's call it person, and insert here three parameters: first name, last name, and profession. Then run in console, write I am, write first name, then last name, then the text and I am, and place here third parameter profession. Then invoke this function, and as an argument let's place here only first name, for example John. So as you see, function has three parameters, but as arguments we have only one. If we reload, we will get I am John, but as for last name and profession we have here undefined. The reason is that we did not insert the rest of the arguments. JavaScript engine found here one argument, and as a default it has been represented as first parameter, first name. In order to fix that, in ES5 we have several ways. First one is to use if statement, and as a condition we have to place here last name triple equals to undefined. So if this condition is true, we need to assign the value to last name parameter, for example as Smith. The exact same thing we have to do for third parameter, which is profession. So create if statement, as a condition write profession triple equals to undefined. So again, if this condition is true, then we need to write profession equals to, let's say, programmer. So if we reload the page, we will get the result what we wanted. I am John Smith and I am programmer. Okay, now let's insert second and third arguments and write, for example, Doe as last name and then instructor as profession. Reload the page and we have I am John Doe and I am instructor. In this case, the conditions in if statements were false, so the code inside them wasn't executed, and we got the result with different last name and profession. So this is one way to fix that problem, but besides that, instead of if statements, we can use logical OR operator and achieve the same result. Let's do it for profession parameter, delete if statement, and instead of it write profession equals to profession or programmer. This is kind of short way than using if statement. So when we invoke function, if we insert their third argument, then parameter profession will take relevant value. But if we miss third parameter, then it will take as a value programmer. So reload the page and we have same result because the third argument is defined. But if we delete it, then we will get programmer as a value of profession. Alright, this is the way how we could work with parameters in ES5. Honestly, it wasn't so bad, but ES6 offers us much better way. We don't need if statements or logical OR operators anymore. We can simply assign the default values to parameters when we create them. So write here first name equals to John, then assign Smith to last name, and for profession, write programmer. Also delete the arguments below. Reload and we have default parameter values. I am John Smith and I am programmer. So those are default parameters with default values. But of course, if we insert here arguments, for example, as first name Nick, then Doe as last name, and instructor for profession, then they will be overwritten to default values and we will get I am Nick Doe and I am instructor. So this is the main use case of default parameters in ES6. I'm not going to go further and write some crazy examples. I think it's quite enough to be able to use them in future. So let's move on. In this lecture, I want to talk about next very helpful and flexible feature of ES6. I'm going to demonstrate what spread operator is. Actually, it's a really nice and great tool and it makes our lives much more easier as JavaScript developers. As usually, I'm going to compare ES5 code to ES6. Let's say we have two arrays, right, constant numbers 1, and insert here some numbers, and then create second variable, constant numbers 2, again with some numbers. Then assume that we need to concatenate those arrays and make a new one. For that, in JavaScript we have a built-in method called concat, which actually works with arrays and helps us to make new array with concatenating two or more arrays. So create another variable, let numbers 3, which equals to numbers1 dot concat, and as an argument place here numbers 2. Let's see what we have. Display number 3 array in console. So we have a new array which consists of items from numbers 1 and numbers 2 arrays. This is a good way, it works nice, but sometimes it's not really convenient, especially when we want, for example, to concatenate those arrays and between their items insert a new one. In order to achieve that, let's use a little trick. Actually, this is one of the ways, but you can do it using different ways. Let's delete those lines, create again, new array, and assign to it empty array. Then at first concatenate this empty array with numbers1 array. So write numbers3 equals to numbers3 dot concat and insert here numbers1. Now let's see in console what we have. Write console.log number3, reload, and we have an array with items of numbers1 array. So now is the moment when I want to add new item, which then should be placed between numbers1 and numbers2 array items. So use here push method and add new item. Write numbers3 dot push, and as an argument let's place here 10, reload, and you see that new item is added to numbers3 array. Okay, now it's time to concatenate it with numbers2 array. For that write numbers3 equals to numbers3 dot concat and then write numbers2, reload, and we have results that we wanted to get. But in order to achieve that, as you see, we needed to write a couple of lines of code. In ES6 this stuff became much more simpler because of spread operator. We can simply create a new variable, let's call it numbers4, then open square brackets, and now it's time to use spread operator. For that we just need to write 3 dots and then name of the array. Actually, spread operator takes out items from array, but because of that we have passed it into square brackets. Finally, we will get a new array. Okay, in the same way, let's place your second array. Write dot 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 numbers2. Let's run numbers4 in console, duplicate it and change. So we have here new array which consists of items from numbers1 and numbers2 arrays. So using spread operator in a very simple way, we have concatenated numbers1 and numbers2 arrays. And in order to add new items anywhere we want, I mean between array items at the beginning or at the end of the array, we just need simply to write, for example, 10, then between arrays write 20, and then to the end write 30. Reload, and you see that items are added on their relevant places. So as you see, it's clear how helpful and useful spread operator is, because to achieve the same result we just needed to write only one line of code. Alright, this was the case of concatenating the arrays, but using spread operator we can even copy the arrays. Let's try to do it using ES5 and create new array which will consist of names, right? Jane, then Bob, Alex, and right here Anne. So we want to copy this array, and for that let's create another variable and assign to it names array. Let's call it names copy, which equals to names. Let's log both variables in console, right? Console.log names, and then console.log names copy. So you see that we have two arrays with exact same values. But if we use push method and add new item to names array, for example John, then it will be added to both arrays. It doesn't matter if we add item to names array or names copy array. In both cases we will have the same result. Actually, this stuff is already known for you from JavaScript behind the scenes section, where we have talked about primitives versus objects. Because of that, arrays are objects. Names copy variable became just a reference of names array in memory space. But actually we don't need it. We need to copy the array and create new memory space for it. So in order to avoid update on both of them, in ES5 we can do it in the following way. let's make here some changes. We need to concatenate an empty array with names array. So reload, and you see that in this case, after using push method, the new item is added to names array only and not to names copy array. Alright, as you see, like it was in previous case, in order to achieve needed result, we have to use some tricks and hacks in ES5, but in ES6, again, we can do it very simply. We just need to use spread operator. So right here, names. As you see, it's surrounded by square brackets, so spread operator will iterate over the names array and then will share its items to a new array. Reload, and we have the same output. Again, you can see how convenient it is to use spread operator. It makes code more concise and also more understandable. Before we finish, I want to show you one more use case of spread operator. And for that, I'm going to create function. Let's call it sum. This function will take 3 parameters, x, y, and z. And then in console, let's run the sum of these parameters, right? X plus y plus z. Now let's assume we want to insert as an argument array. So let's create new variable numbers and insert here 10, 20, and 30. And in order to use this array as an argument, in ES5 we have to use apply method. As you remember, this method calls function, but as an argument it takes array. This is the only difference between call and apply methods. So write sum.apply. Because of that, we are not interested in about this variable. Let's just place here null as the first argument, and then as a second one, insert numbers. Reload, and we have 60, the sum of the numbers. Again, using spread operator, we can achieve this result in very simpler way. We don't need to use apply method. We have to write just ... numbers. In this case, we don't need to use square brackets here because we just need to take out numbers from array and not to create new array. So reload, and we have 60 again. Alright, so this is the way how spread operator works. You agree that it's very helpful and powerful feature of ES6. Okay, let's go ahead. In previous lecture, we have discussed how spread operator works, and now I want to introduce you a new type of parameter in ES6, which is rest. From syntactic perspective, they are expressed in exact same way. We have to use 3 dots, but rest parameter works in kind of opposite way. So let's create simple function constant a equals to function and insert here 2 parameters, x and y. Let's run in console the sum of those parameters. Write console.log x plus y. Then call the function and place here more than 2 arguments. Write 10, 20, 30, and 40. If we reload, then we will get sum of first and second arguments. Regardless of that, we have passed here more than 2 arguments. Function is working without any errors or bugs. But again, we get sum of only first 2 arguments. So actually it's interesting how we can use the rest of the arguments. In ES5 we have special keyword arguments, which represents arguments of function and returns array-like object. It's index-based and has the length property. Let's at first see in console what arguments look like. Write console.log arguments. Then reload. And you see that we have object, which looks like an array. The items have index numbers, and also it has length property. Also, as you notice, it doesn't contain only third and fourth arguments. It includes all 4 arguments. So in order to use third and fourth arguments and calculate the total sum, we can write the following: plus arguments, and for third argument we have to place the index number 2, then again plus arguments with index number 3. Reload, and we have 100, the sum of all the arguments. As we said, arguments is an array-like object, so in order to use array methods with it, we need to transform it into array. I'm sure you remember ES5 approach, which we have seen in previous videos. So we need to write array.prototype.slice.call. So if we reload, we will get argument collection, but in this case as an array. I would like to note that arguments object doesn't work with arrow functions. If we change this regular function and write here arrow function, then we will get an error telling us that arguments is not defined. Alright, in ES6 there is no need to use arguments object because new version of JavaScript allows us to use REST parameter, which is more flexible and convenient than arguments. Let's delete those lines and after x and y write ... rest. Actually, it's not keyword, you can use here anything you want, like for example arguments or something else. But remember that using 3 dots is always mandatory. Let's at first see in console what this parameter gives us. Write console.log rest. So as you see, it returns an array, but only with 2 arguments, third and fourth, which actually are missed as parameters. And in order to get the sum of these arguments, we have to write x plus y plus rest with index number 0, and then plus rest with index number 1. So we have again total sum of arguments. Alright, let's use another example and see better the power of rest parameter. Create constant family. Suppose that we would have several members of family. Those persons would have common last name, so let's place here as a first parameter last name. And then let's assume that as arguments we would have names of family members. For that I'm going to use a rest parameter, so write ... names, then use arrow function. Because of that, rest parameter returns array, therefore I'm going to use array helper method for each, and using this method we will define first names and last names for each family member. So write names.forEach, then as the current item write name, which is followed by arrow function, and then run in console name and last name using template strings. Alright, let's invoke this function right below family. For last name I'm going to insert here argument as, for example, Smith. And for names of all family members, let's place here Nick, then Jane, Bob, and Jessica. Let's reload the page. And you see that we have here persons with different names but with common last name, Smith. Alright, so you see how convenient and also how simple it is to use rest parameter. Also you need to remember that we always have to place rest parameter at the end inside parentheses. It doesn't matter how many arguments you will have, rest parameter will work with all arguments which are not represented with parameters. Okay, it was all about rest parameter in ES6. See you in the next video. ES6 allows us to extract arrays and objects using destructuring. It gives us ability to get access on array items and also on properties of objects in kind of convenient and short way. Let's see what I'm talking about. Let's say we have an array which consists of some numbers. For example, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and 60. And we want to get access on its items. For that, you already know that in ES5 we have the following way. Let's create variable 10 and then assign to it array with index number 0. Then create another variable 20 and assign to it array with index number 1. So this is the way how we can access on array items in ES5, but in ES6, thanks to destructuring, we can do the same in much shorter way. Let's comment those lines out, then write constant, open square brackets, and put here the names of the variables 10 and 20. And after that, we need to link those variables to array. So if we log those variables in console, write here 10 and 20, then we will get 10 and 20 first and second array items in console. So using destructuring, we have created variables, and at the same time we have extracted items from an array. So as you see, we didn't need to declare separately variables, we just needed one constant variable declaration, and also we have used array only once. As a result, we got items from array in order. If we write here, for example, 30, and also run it in console, then we will get third item of array 30. Alright, let's assume that we want to get access on sixth item, which is 60. For that we need to miss two items, 40 and 50. And in order to achieve that, we just need to place here two commas and then write, for example, 60. Let's run it in console. And you see that we got last item of array 60. Alright, we're able to use rest parameter when we deal with destructuring. So in order to get rest of the items, let's insert here ... items and also run it in console. Reload, and we have 10, 20, and the rest of the items. But as you see, they are represented in an array. That's because, as we know, rest parameter returns an array. So in order to get them like first and second items, I mean to get them in normal way, we're able to use spread operator. So if we place here 3 dots before items, then it will take out array items and display them in console. Alright. This is the way how we can use destructuring with arrays, and now I'm going to talk about objects. At first, let's create an object, call it person, then insert here some properties, first name John, then last name Smith, and age 30. As you remember, in ES5 we used to access on properties of objects using the following way. You know, sometimes we write ES5 code, but I'm trying always to use const and let declarations because I want you to quickly adapt with them. So in order to get access on first name and last name properties and store them in variables, we have to write constant a equals to person.firstname, then constant b equals to person.lastname. So this is the way of ES5, but in ES6 we can destructure objects as well. Let's comment this code out and then create constant. In case of objects, we need to use curly braces and then write first name, last name, and also link those variables to person object. Let's run them in console, write console.log first name and last name. Reload. So we have here John Smith. Okay. You may wonder if those names of variables have to be matched with names of properties, and the answer is yes. If we change, for example, last name into surname, and also run it in console, then we will get undefined. Actually, it means that JavaScript engine couldn't find relevant value for surname variable in person object. In case of objects, we don't have to protect order of properties. It doesn't matter if we write at first age or last name. The key point is to match names of variables to properties. So if we write age at the beginning and then change back surname into last name, also run them in console, we will get 30 and John Smith. Alright, let's go ahead and describe how we can use the structuring of objects with functions. Let's comment this code out and create function expression. Let's call it about me. I'm going to insert here parameter John, which actually will represent person object. And then I'm going to destructure person object. So write constant, then open curly braces, and write first name, last name, and age. And also link those variables to parameter John. Let's run in console, write console.log IAM, then insert here variable first name, then last name, then write text and IAM. Also place here the age variable and then years old. Let's call this function and as an argument use person object. Reload, and we have I am John Smith and I am 30 years old. Alright, it's fine, but we can write this stuff in much concise way. We can directly destructure person object and insert them as a parameter instead of John. Also, we don't need this line. So let's reload, and you see that we have the same result, but as you see, in more concise way. Alright, that's it. So in this lecture we have learned what destructuring is and how to use it with arrays and objects. See you in the next video. In this lecture we're going to be talking about new data structures in ES6, which are maps and sets. Those new data structures can be very useful and helpful in many real-world situations. At first I'm going to introduce you map. Actually, maps store data as key-value pairs, and one of the most important things regarding maps is that we're able to store any data types as keys and values. Alright, let's demonstrate how to create maps syntactically, create variable and call it map data. Actually, we need to create maps using constructor notation. For that we have to use new operator and then the keyword map with capital letter. Let's run it in console and see what map looks like. Write map data, reload, and here it is. So the first thing that we see here is size, which actually is a property, and it gives us the size of map. I mean that it indicates the number of key value pairs. It's actually like the length property of an array. If we drop down underscore underscore proto underscore underscore, we will find here the methods which we are able to use with maps. One of the methods that you see here is set. So at first I'm going to use it. Actually, set method allows us to insert data into map. So let's write map data dot set and then write inside parentheses as a key name and then as value John. reload, and you see that item is added. In this case, both key and value is represented as strings, but instead of strings, we're able to use numbers, Boolean values, arrays, objects, and even functions. Let's add as a key Boolean value, write mapData.set, write here true, and then the value yes. Also, let's create an object, write constant object, and then add it as key, write again mapData.set object, and then as a value write person. Reload the page and you see that we have here our newly added key value pairs. Alright, in order to get the size of map, we just need to use size property using dot notation. Let's run it in console, duplicate and write here dot size. So here we have 3 because map actually contains 3 items. So using set method is one of the ways to add items into map, but we can initialize map with data by passing an array, which itself will include other arrays with key value pairs. Let's see how it works. Open square brackets, then create array with key 10 and with value again write 10. Then create another array, write isMarried, and the value false. Reload, and you see we have here newly added items. Alright, that's actually how we add items into map, and now let's see how we can get access on them. For that there is one of the methods which is called get. So in order to get item, for example name, we have to write console.log mapData.get and then the key name. Reload, and we have value of name key which is John. Okay, in order to check if there exists the specified key, we can use one of the methods which is called has. So if the key exists, it returns true value, otherwise it returns false. Let's check if mapData contains object key, so write console.log mapData.has and then insert here object. Reload, and we have true because map contains the mentioned key. Alright, besides the has method, we have delete, which actually allows us to delete from map a single key value pairs. So for example, if we write mapData.delete and indicate here one of the keys, for example 10, and reload, you will see that 10 with its value is removed from map. Okay, in order to delete the entire data from map, we can use clear method, which actually will make our map empty. So let's write mapData.clear, then reload, and you see that map is empty. Alright, let's delete clear method. And if we check __proto__, we will find here for each array helper method. And I would like to note that this is the only array helper which we are able to use with maps. So let's delete this console.logs and use for each helper with mapData, write mapData.forEach. As a first parameter, we're going to place here value because at first for each method will return values of keys. And then as the second parameter, let's insert here key. Run in console, value and key. Reload, and we have here keys and values, the result that we were expecting. Okay, besides for each helper, we can use for off statement with maps. So let's comment for each method out and then write for. Suppose that we want to get keys from map, so let's create let key, then use the keyword of, In order to get all the keys from map, we have to use one of the methods of map, which is called keys. So write mapdata.keys and then run in console. Right here, key. Let's reload the page, and you see that we have here all the keys from map. In the same way, we can get all the values, and for that we have to use other method, which is called values. So let's change here keys into values. Also write value instead of key. Reload, and now we have the values. Alright, if we want to get simultaneously keys and values, we can use another method, which is entries. So let's change values into entries, and also write here instead of value array, because entries method actually returns key value pairs as arrays. So let's reload, and you see that we have arrays which consist of key value pairs. If we don't want to get them as arrays, then simply we can destructure them. So let's change array into key value, write them inside square brackets, and also run them in console. Reload, and we have now keys and values represented without arrays. Alright, it was all about maps. Let's go ahead and talk about another new data structure in ES6, which is set. Actually, set holds values without keys, and mostly it's used in real world when we want to store only unique values. Let's see what it means. I'm going to comment this code out. In order to create set, we have to use again constructor notation. Let's create variable and call it setData. Then use new operator and write set. Run it in console in order to see what it actually looks like. Write console.log setData. So like map, set has size property as well. And if we drop down __proto__, we will find here some methods that we have already seen with map. But if you look at them carefully, you will notice that actually some of them are missing, because they are not used with sets. Alright, let's see how we can add items into set. We have two ways for doing that. The first one is to use add method. So if we write setData.add with the value nick, then reload, we will have here nick. Like it was in case of map, we can add as values any data type, and you can test it on your own. The second method to add items is to place here inside parentheses array, and then add as many items as we want. So let's insert here John, then 10, then for example false value. Also place here object with property first name Bob, and to the end let's add here John once again and see what happens. Reload. So we have here all the items that we have just added, but you notice that John is added here only once. That's because generally set stores only unique values. So if we check the size of set, then we will get 5. So actually we have added 6 items, but because of that we have repeated John. Set stored it only once, and that's why we have here 5 instead of 6. Alright, in case of sets we can use has, delete, clear methods, also array for each helper, but I'm not going to waste time on that because they work in the exact same way as it was in case of maps. The last thing that I'm going to do is to use for of statement because it gives us a bit different result. So let's create for, then let value of set data dot values, then run it in console. So if we reload, we will get values. The same will happen if we use here keys method instead of values. And it happens because actually set doesn't have keys. But if we use entries method instead of keys, then we will get arrays, and you see that each of these arrays contain duplicated values. Honestly, the cases of keys and entries methods are kind of weird, but that's the way how they work. Alright, this was all about new data structures in ES6, maps and sets. I think both of them are very flexible and powerful data types, especially map, and they can be used in many cases instead of objects and arrays in real world. Also, the key point is that they work in very simple way. Okay, let's move on. So we have come to the point where you will introduce to one of the biggest additions in ES6, which is classes. If you are familiar with other object-oriented programming languages, then classes won't be new for you. But in ES6, classes are not like classes in other object-oriented programming languages like Java, C#, PHP, and many others. In JavaScript, classes are just syntactic sugar, and they make our job much easier. Actually, classes act like function constructors, which we have already learned. In this lecture, I'm going to compare ES5 to ES6, and therefore let's recall how function constructors work. Create function person ES5 with some parameters, right? First name, then last name, and age. As you remember, we need to write then this dot first name equals to first name, then this dot last name equals to last name, and do the same for age, right? This dot age equals to age. Now using this constructor function, I'm going to create brand new object using new operator, right? Constant nick ES5 equals to new person ES5, and then insert here arguments. As a first name, write nick, then Smith, and as the age, write 28. Okay, let's see in console what this object looks like. Write nick ES5. So here we have person object with properties and with relevant values. Also, we have here underscore underscore proto underscore underscore, which, as you remember, is assigned by function constructor in order to get access on prototype object. And also, you see here another underscore underscore proto underscore underscore, which actually allows us to get access on global object function prototype. Because of that, we have access on prototype object of function constructor. We can assign to it the method, which can be used for every brand new object. So that's right, person ES5 dot prototype dot, and right here the method name about person, then assign to it anonymous function, and run in console the following text. My name is, then insert here this dot first name, then this dot last name, and I am, and insert here this dot age, years old. Alright, let's call this method for person nick ES5. Reload, and we have my name is Nick Smith and I am 28 years old. Alright, that's the way how we deal with function constructors and prototypes in ES5. Now let's see what happens in ES6. So to create the same stuff, we need to use class keyword, but before that let's make here a border. and then write class, which is followed by the name of the class. Let's write here person ES6. So actually using different syntax, we have created function constructor, and to prove that, let's check the type of class, write console.log, use here type of operator, and then person ES6. Reload, and you see that it's a function. Alright, the next thing that we have to do is to use constructor method in order to assign properties to the brand new object. So write keyword constructor, and here we need to place the parameters. So let's copy them and paste here. And now it's time to create brand new object. So write constant Nick ES6 equals to new person ES6, and then place your arguments. Write Nick as first name, then again Smith, and as the age write 28. Let's check in console this object, write Nick ES6. So here we have person ES6 object with properties and values. So this person looks like in the exact same way as it was in case of person ES5. Let's write Nick ES5. If we drop down it, you will find that those two objects are almost similar. The only distinction is that in prototype object of person ES5, we have method about person. So to achieve the same in ES6 classes is much more easier because we can do it without writing any prototypes. So let's see how we can do that. The first thing to note is that after constructor method, we don't need to place here comma. We can directly create method. Let's call it about person. Then grab from person ES5 this content and paste here. Let's call this method for Nick ES6, right? Nick ES6 dot about person. Reload, and we have the same result. So actually we have achieved the exact same, but as you see, in much more easier and convenient way. Alright, let's move on and talk about prototypal inheritance. I'm going to create another function constructor. Let's call it developer ES5 and insert here parameters like first name, last name, then write age, experience, and the last one right here, projects. As you see, both function constructors have first name, last name, and age parameters. For those three parameters, I'm going to use person ES5 constructor function. So we need to write person ES5. In order to receive developer ES5 constructor function, properties of person ES5 constructor, we need to call person ES5 and use the special variable this. And also insert here first name, last name, and age. So here, this variable points to brand new object which will be created using developer ES5 constructor function. As for experience and projects parameters, let's write this.experience equals to experience, and then this.projects equals to projects. Alright, now let's create new object, write constant and call it Alex dev, then write new developer ES5, and as arguments let's place here as the first name Alex, then Brown as last name, then write 30 as age, 10 as experience, and write the last one, 5, as projects. Okay, let's see in console, write AlexDev. So you see that this object contains all the properties and values as we expected. Okay, let's say that we want to use AboutPerson method for newly created developer object. For that we have to do the following. We have to assign to prototype object of developer ES5 constructor the copy of person ES5 prototype object. And for that we need to use object.create method. So write developer ES5 dot prototype equals to object.create and inside parentheses insert person ES5 dot prototype. So again, object.create method is used here because we need to create copy of person ES5 prototype object and not only the reference to it. Make sense? Okay, so now we are able to use AboutPerson method from person ES5 prototype object and use it for developer object. So let's write AlexDev dot AboutPerson, reload, and we have my name is Alex Brown and I am 30 years old. So as you see, AlexDev object has inherited method from person ES5 prototype object. Alright, now I'm going to assign new method to developer ES5 prototype object, which actually will be used only for brand new objects created by developer ES5 constructor. So let's write developer ES5 dot prototype dot about dev and assign to it function. Then write console.log and let's use here all the properties which we have assigned to developer ES5 constructor. So write the following: my name is, then this.firstname, then use here last name, so write this.lastname, then I am, and this.age, years old with, and use here experience, then write the text again, years of experience, and I have participated in, and write here this.projects, and then projects. Okay, let's call this method, write AlexDev.AboutDev. So if we reload, we will get my name is Alex Brown, I'm 30 years old with 10 years of experience, and I have participated in 5 projects. Alright, so as we said, this method works only for objects which are created using developer ES5 constructor, and in order to prove that, let's call this method for Nick ES5 object as well. Write Nick ES5 dot about dev, reload, and you see that we have an error which tells us that about dev is not a function. In order to understand better why we have used object.create method, let's get rid of it and leave only person ES5.prototype object. Let's reload, and you see that it works now for both objects. The only thing is that we have here undefined for experience and projects because actually person ES5 constructor doesn't have those parameters. Alright, so again in this case both constructors have the same prototype object, but when we use object.create, new copy of prototype object is created. Generally in ES5 we always use object.create method for more privacy. Okay, I believe you agree that in ES5 there are lots of stuff to do regarding prototypal inheritance. It's hard to understand, also it causes confusion if you are not an experienced JavaScript developer, but in case of ES6 version everything becomes much more simpler. Let's create another class for developer, call it developer ES6, So in order to inherit from person ES6 properties and methods, we need to use keyword extends and then person ES6. Now again we have to use constructor method with all the parameters. So right here constructor and then copy the parameters. Let's take a look on ES5 version. So here we have used call method and I believe you have understood why we have done it. But in ES6 it's no longer needed because there exists built-in method called super, which actually will call person ES6 class. So in this case, remember that person ES6 class is called as superclass and developer ES6 class is called as subclass. Alright, let's use super method and insert as arguments first name, last name, and age. And then for the rest of the parameters, I mean experience and projects, we have to write this.experience equals to experience and then this.projects equals to projects. Besides that, we have above about dev method, so let's create it and then copy the content and paste here. Alright, everything is ready. I'm going to create new object. Let's call it Bob Dev, which equals to new developer ES6 and insert here arguments Bob as first name, then James, then 40, 15 and for example 7. And then call about dev method, write bobdev.aboutDev. Reload, and we have my name is Bob James, I'm 40 years old with 15 years of experience and I have participated in 7 projects. Alright, let's try to use about person method for bobdev object. Write bobdev.aboutPerson. Reload, and you see that it works perfectly as well. But if we try to use about dev method for Nick ES6 object, then we will get an error, and I'm sure you guessed why. When we use ES6, behind the scenes happens the same stuff that was in case of using object.create method. Make sense? Okay, I know that it was a bit hard lecture, but I tried to show you clearly difference between ES5 and ES6 when we deal with prototypal inheritance. I hope you understood well everything, but if not, you can rewatch the video carefully. Alright, let's go ahead.